Hi, I'm Jay Leeming, and thank you for listening to this podcast. If you are able to support this podcast by joining my Patreon community, please do so. That gives you access to bonus recordings, as well as to performances I do online of many of the great epics of the world. And it also ensures that I can make these recordings freely available to others. You can join that community at patreon.com/storyjl. Thanks very much. Do we live in a world of infinite possibility or in a world of boxes and walls? Can beds float? Can a blue snake appear in the darkness? These are some of the questions which this story asks of us. A story from the gigantic, mythic cosmos known as the 1001 Nights. My name is Jay Leeming, and this is the Crane Bag Podcast. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for attending to this story. It is a beautiful story, and I am grateful for the chance to tell it. Shall we begin? Let us begin. Once there was a wandering wizard, a warlock, some said. He had a green earring in his left ear. He was known to wander across this world and to learn many things and to perhaps change events around him. For this life is a river flowing and we are the stones in it, but perhaps we are the river as well, altering the stones, altering the banks of that river, sweeping a leaf away, and perhaps sometimes we are the leaf swept away. Well, this wizard, this warlock, this wizard, came one day to the city of Baghdad, a beautiful city. He walked through its streets. He marveled at its towers and its minarets. He could hear poems being recited into the open air, sung, the words sung into that bright and beautiful air, filling the world with beauty. And he walked down the streets, and there were chickens and boys running after a ball. There was an old woman. She has cards. Look, even now she's spreading the cards on the table. There's the hanged man. There's the king of cups. There's the 9 of swords. There is the devil. Yes, there they all are, and then they get wiped away, taken away. She puts the cards in her pocket. It was a bustling, beautiful city. And he went to the biggest marketplace in this city. And he wandered here and there. There were people selling things, pots, rugs, apples, all these things, onions for sale, flowers. There were people singing, people arguing, talking, dreaming, and falling in love. But he noticed one particular man, a young man. He was a cook. He had a stall there. He was cooking food for the people. But this young man, well, he looked pale and sad. So, when there was a spare moment, when the crowd was not around him so tightly, the wizard went to this cook and said, "Young man, why is it you seem so sad and pale and even sickly?" And the young man said, "I cannot unburden my heart to you now in the midst of this busy marketplace. It's lunch hour. But come at the afternoon, come in the hour of the mid-afternoon prayer, and then I will tell you the sorrows that are on my heart." So, a little while later, the wizard returned at the hour of mid-afternoon prayer. And he went to the stall where the cook worked, and there was no one there buying food, so the two of them sat down on a wooden bench, and the cook wiped his hands on his apron, and he said, "Sir, I am stricken with love, for I have fallen madly in love with the daughter of the caliph of this city. Each day I see her parading through the streets, surrounded by 40 handmaidens, and each of these handmaidens is as beautiful as the full moon. But this princess, she is as beautiful as the sun itself. So I am madly in love with her, but there's no hope, there is no way that I will ever spend any time with her. For I am nothing but a lowly cook here in the marketplace, and she is a princess, a jewel far beyond my reach." And the wizard said, "I can cure you of this. I can bring health to you. And this cure is not forgetting. It is no other thing but to be brought together with her, the woman you love. I can make this happen. However, I will require a payment." "Payment is no trouble," said the cook. "I will give you whatever you ask for." "Well then," said the wizard, "you must simply give me all of the money you possess." "I will happily do that," said the cook. "For if I do not get to share the joys and delights of love with this princess, well, life is not worth living, and I will simply throw myself into the sea." "All right then," said the wizard. "Well, meet me tomorrow night outside the western gate of the city, beside the green stone. And bring with you certain things. Bring with you a copper vial. Bring 7 needles. Bring 7 kinds of felt and 7 kinds of silk. Bring a piece of cooked chicken. Bring a lump of clay. Bring the shoulder blade of a sheep. Bring all of these things. Bring them to the green stone outside the western gate of the city, and I will meet you there." So time went on. Day became night, became day again, and then the following night, indeed, the cook left the heart of the city and walked through the streets, through the cobbled streets this way and that, until he came to the western gate of the city. And he walked into the darkness beyond, to the green stone, lit by moonlight as it was. And there was the wizard, and he said, "Have you brought the necessary things?" "Yes, I have," said the cook. And he laid down on the ground the copper vial and the 7 needles and the 7 pieces of felt and the 7 pieces of silk and the piece of cooked chicken and the wad of clay and the shoulder blade of the sheep. He brought all of these things, and he brought his money as well. The wizard took the cook's money, and then he arranged these objects in a very intricate pattern, impaling certain things like the lump of cooked chicken on the silk with the needles, and arranging the needles in the copper vial and all these things in a very particular pattern that was forceful and beautiful, like a word spoken by the earth that had never spoken such a word before. And then the wizard began to chant and sing. And his wild words, in an unknown language, went out into the darkness. And they rang out as if they themselves were spirits seeking other spirits in the darkness. And at his feet, lit by a single candle, were all of the objects brought by the cook. The wizard said, "I have knocked upon the door of the earth. Shall my knocking be answered?" There was no reply. The wind blew, and the candle flickered. And then the wizard said again, "I have knocked upon the door of the earth. Will my knocking be answered?" Still no reply. The stars sparkling high above, the moon shining down. And the third time he said, "I have knocked upon the door of the earth. Shall my knocking be answered?" And from out of the darkness a voice said, "It shall." And then they heard a slithering sound and footsteps coming closer. And as they looked dimly in the darkness, they could see 3 pairs of red eyes looking at them. And then, as the candle flickered once more, they saw a jinn. A genie, a being of fire. There he was, and beside him was a basilisk, a lizard-like creature. And on his other side was a large blue snake. And the jinn said, "I have heard your knocking, and I have answered. Wizard, tell me, what is it you desire?" And the wizard said, "I desire your help in bringing together this cook with the princess, the daughter of the caliph of the city of Baghdad." "That can be done," said the jinn. Simply consign these tools you have gathered to the realm of fire, and I shall accept them, and you shall have my assistance." "Very good," said the wizard. "I shall give these offerings to the realm of fire, and they shall be yours." So he lit a small fire, and he threw all of the objects into the fire: the shoulder blade of the sheep, and the 7 needles, and the copper vial, and the 7 pieces of felt, and the 7 pieces of silk, and the piece of cooked chicken, and the lump of clay. All of these things went into the fire. And the eyes of the Jinn were filled with delight, and he said, "Thank you, wizard, thank you. You shall have the help which you desire." And there was a clap of thunder, and suddenly the Jinn, the basilisk, and the blue snake all disappeared, and the candle and the fire were blown out. Shoo! And the smoke rose up towards the stars. And the wizard said, "My friend, the princess shall come to you tomorrow night." "But how?" said the cook. "Do not ask how. It shall happen. Be sure of that." Well, the cook had no idea how this would be possible, how this could even happen. But the Jinn he had seen had been very real, and the basilisk and the blue snake, and magic had been in the air, that was for sure. So he was filled with anticipation and wonder at the same time. Now, it was very hot in Baghdad at this time, you should know, and so the cook had taken to the habit of sleeping on the roof of his house, which was flat, and he would go up there and sleep in the evening. So the next night, he did as he always did, and he went up to the roof of his house, and he lay down, and he tried to sleep. But he found, of course, that he could not sleep. No, it was impossible. This princess was going to just appear. What would happen? Would she step through a weird pink portal, or would something, I don't know, would there be a tunnel open up to the, I mean, he had no idea what would happen. It seemed impossible, but the Jinn had been real. But it seems impossible, but the Jinn had been real. But it seems impossible. Well, he sat there for a while. It was no use sleeping, and he waited. The city was quiet, the stars sparkling above, the moon shining down. And then something caught his eye, something far off, shining in the moonlight, shining though it was floating in mid-air. What was it? It was coming towards him. Was it a bird? It was too still in its way to be a bird. He looked. It was shiny. It was made of metal. It was a brass bed. There was a bed floating through the night sky. It had gone through the streets of Baghdad, and now it was rising up just to the level of his rooftop. And it came floating with the sheets and the blankets on this bed, and the bedclothes of the princess herself drifting and rippling in the breeze. And it came and it landed there with a slight bump on the roof of the house. And the noise of this bump as the brass bed hit the tiles of the roof, the princess awoke. And she opened her eyes, and she looked around. And she looked at the cook, and she said, "Who are you? Where am I? What's going on?" And the cook said, "I am one who has been wounded by the glance from your eyes, one who has been killed by your beauty, and one who is willing to be your slave till the end of time." Well, this was an interesting way to begin a conversation. She wasn't exactly sure what to say, but she said, "Well, do you have some tea?" And he said, "Yes, I can get us some tea." So he brought some tea for the two of them, and they sat there on the roof of this house, talking in the moonlight, drinking some tea. Well, they had a good visit that night, and when the blue light of dawn was just coming into the sky, she climbed back into that bed. And the bed rose up from the tiles of the roof and floated away through the streets of Baghdad and back to the palace. Well, this went on for many nights, and the two of them told their stories to each other. And they shared stories made of words and of silence as well, and stories told with the hands and with the lips and with the eyes. And after a while they came to share many delightful nights of love on the roof of this house, beneath the glittering stars, with the moon shining down. This went on for some time. And then finally, one day, the princess was spending some time with her mother on one of the white balconies of the palace. And the sun was shining, and she was walking back and forth as her mother spoke to her about this, telling her stories about far and distant lands. And the princess was looking out at the city as she heard these stories. And all at once the sun shone through the princess's dress, and her mother looked at her and saw that she was becoming large in the belly. And she put down her weaving, and she said, "My dear, my daughter, what has happened to you? Look, you are large in the belly. You are expecting a child." And the princess confessed everything she knew, that is. She said, "Oh, mother, there's this wonderful boy I spend time with, a wonderful young man." And she explained the whole thing as she went to sleep, and then magically her bed sort of floated through the city, and she awoke on the rooftop of this distant house. And she said, "Mother, I don't even know if this man is real or what, or where he's from, or where he is. I don't know what's going on, but it's very magical, and it is pure love, and it is so sweet." "Well, whatever," her mother said. "This is very real, is what it is. I think this boy is real, because your belly is real. This is what's going on. We must tell your father." So they went to the Caliph, the leader, the commander of the faithful, he who is like a shadow of Allah, he who leads all the people of his kingdom. And they went to him, and they told him the news. And he was furious. "Who is this boy? Some lowly boy. You were destined to marry a prince, perhaps the prince of Cairo or the prince of Damascus, some beautiful, wonderful prince who's powerful in this world, not some lowly boy. Who is he? We don't even know. We must find him out." "Oh, father," she said, "he's so sweet, he's so lovely." "I don't care about sweet and lovely. No, we need a good match for you, and I don't think this boy is it. We will find him." And so the king resolved to find out where the bed of his daughter went each night. And he spoke with his vizier, and he conferred for a while. And the vizier was a clever man, and he said, "My king, my caliph, I have a plan." And so he got a pillow filled with millet seeds. And he put this pillow on the bed of the princess, a lovely, beautiful pillow. It was green and gold and red. He put it on the bed, and he made sure to cut a small hole in the edge of this pillow, in the side of this pillow, so the millet seeds would trickle out in the night as it moved through the streets of Baghdad. And so it was. That night, as every night, this bed levitated out of the palace and went drifting through the streets of Baghdad. There were stray dogs there, stray cats. They looked up. They saw this bed floating through the streets just above their heads. There was a drunken man in an alley there sleeping it off, but he was awoken by a strange whistling sound of the bed moving through the air, and he looked, and he was astounded to see this brass bed floating through the streets of Baghdad. Well, so it went, and it arrived at the house of the cook, but all along the way it had spread millet seeds through the streets. So the next day, when the sun had risen and was shining down upon the world, the caliph, his vizier, and several soldiers all set out from the royal palace through the streets of Baghdad, following the trail of millet. These millet seeds could clearly be seen in the streets. The vizier went first, leaning over, studying the ground. People wondered at this. What was he doing? Looking down? Had he lost something? Well, he and the caliph and all the soldiers went through the streets of Baghdad, following the millet trail. And at last they came to a house like many of the others, with a flat roof. And the caliph said, "Just as I thought. This is no prince my daughter is spending time with, but some humble man. This must be stopped." And they looked, and in fact there on the roof were the wizard and the cook, looking down. And the cook said, "What are we going to do? What are we going to do? This caliph does not look like a nice man. He wants to kill me or put me in jail or something." And the wizard said, "Have no fear." And he took a jug of water from a nearby table on the roof of that house, and he gave it to the cook, and he said, "Here, pour a little bit of water over the side of each side of this house." So the cook went to each side of the house, and he poured a little water down into the street. And a moment later, once he was finished, the wizard said a magic word. Who knows what that word was? How can I possibly conceive of such a word? How can any of us conceive of such a word? But it might have been Kashlumga Katanga Sapumfa. And he said this word, and suddenly there was a rushing river wrapping itself around the house, like the coils of a great snake. Rushing, foaming river. It just welled up from the ground. It washed away some rare chickens that were there, and some mice, and some people with some stalls went running away, selling stuff, and the water was just curling around the house. But the caliph said, "My soldiers, you must enter this house." So the soldiers bravely set forth and stepped into this rushing river, but it was no use. The river just swept them away, around and around the house and down the streets of Baghdad and away, wailing as they went. And at this point, the Caliph realized that the wizard was a formidable character that would be better as a friend than an enemy. So he looked up to the roof of the house and he said, "I see, sir, that you are a man of wisdom and power. Come, let us retire to the royal throne room, and there we will speak about the future of my daughter the princess and this young man here." "We accept your invitation," said the wizard. And then he said a word which was the mirror image of the word he had spoken previously. And the rushing river circling the house seemed to hear this word and to lessen its force and to draining away from that house until finally there was only one little puddle left in the street, and a stray dog came and lapped that water up until it was all gone. Well, soon they all gathered in the throne room, and there was the Caliph in his throne, and there was the vizier, and there was the wizard, and there was the cook. And the Caliph said, "Sir, I greet you as one man of power to another. But while my powers are in the earthly realm of this kingdom, clearly yours are from a realm beyond. But I ask you, with all of your wisdom and insight, why is it that you wish to bring together this humble cook here and my daughter, the princess, the pearl of this realm?" And the wizard said, "Your Majesty, we live in a universe of infinite possibility. Some would say it is not possible for a humble cook such as this man to come together in love with your daughter, the princess of the realm. But I say anything is possible, and so I have done what I can to bring these two together so that they may find in each other the love and the joy which is at the heart of all things." "Well," said the Caliph, "I see that your intentions are good, but we do not live in a universe of infinite possibility. No! I am a king. I look after the people. I tax the people and use that money, that gold, to pay for an army which defends them. This is a kingdom with a border. It must be defended with soldiers, with swords and spears. If it is not defended, others will come. They will attack us. No, I live in a realm of rules and laws, and I govern those rules and laws, and I follow them when I must, even I, the Caliph of this kingdom. And if I wish to become a bird and fly away, well, that is simply not an option for me. So how can you say that this is a world of infinite possibility?" "I say it because it is true," said the wizard. "And what's more, it is my experience, and this experience can be yours as well, if only you fetch me a large cauldron filled with water." "Let it be done," said the Caliph. And so servants began scurrying around, and soon they brought a large cauldron, and many servants came with jars of water, and they poured them into the cauldron until it was filled up nearly to the rim with water. "And now," said the Caliph, "and now," said the wizard, "I need a volunteer to step into this cauldron and submerge him or herself completely." Well, the Caliph was a little nervous about doing this. He wasn't sure who this wizard guy was, but he had seen the magical river this wizard had made appear. So he looked at his vizier, and he simply nodded. And his vizier stepped forward and said, "I will do this. I will endure this trial, whatever it is." "Excellent," said the wizard. "Now you must simply step into the cauldron and submerge yourself." "That is easily done," said the vizier. So he stepped over the side and into the cauldron. He stood there for a moment, the water up to just above his knees. He looked at everyone around him. There was the wizard, there was the cook, there was the princess, there was the Caliph. There were all the servants who'd brought the water in their jugs, all of them looking at him. He felt sort of foolish. But then he crouched down, he bent his knees, he got down lower and lower until the water was up to his waist, his back. He scrunched down into that water until he was completely covered by that water. And then he stood up. And as he did so, a saltwater wave splashed him in the face, psh, and then another. Psh, he looked up. There was a blue sky above him, clouds high, high above. He looked around. He could see land nowhere. He was far out at sea. What? "What?" he said to himself. And for a moment he was stricken with terror, but at the same time a strange new kind of joy filled his heart. For he felt his body, and it felt different. There were curves where there had not been curves before, and there was a new softness to parts of him, and his legs were not actually legs. In fact, there was a tail fin there. In fact, he was a mermaid with long flowing hair, and this was a joyous and a jubilant thing. And so, with joy in his heart, he went diving down into that water, and with a mighty beat of that tail, he went swimming away into the blue depths of the sea. It was marvelous. He saw schools of orange fish. He saw a purple octopus flowing, swimming by. He saw fishes of so many different colors and strange bits of seaweed, and far off what seemed like mountains far down under the sea. So he swam for a long, long time. So she swam for a long, long time. And then she saw strands of strange sort of algae in front of her, and she swam closer to them to see what they were. But it turned out they were the fibers of a net. And this net clenched itself around her, and she was lifted up out of the water, out of the water. As this happened, she sang a little song in her heart that it seemed she had just learned, and this song made her tail fin go away. So in fact she had legs, in fact she had feet. And then she was clenched tight by the black threads of this net and lifted up and dumped onto a boat. And she looked, and 3 husky sailors, 3 husky fishermen were looking down at her. And the first said, "By Allah, it is a mermaid from the depths of the sea." "Yes," said the next one, "and she will fetch us many good dinars from the Caliph. If we bring her to the Caliph, he loves wondrous things. He will pay us many things, gold and silver, for this mermaid." "No, we can't do that," said the first one. "It is bad luck. We must return her to the sea. She is meant to be free in the water. We must respect the gifts of the sea, or the sea will be angry with us." "Pish-posh," said the other one. "No way. We're not doing that. We're taking her to the Caliph." Now around the mermaid there were many orange fish that had been caught in the net, gasping and dying, writhing on the deck of the boat. And still these fishermen talked, and the third one said, "I think he's right. I think we should return her to the sea." "No," said the middle one. "No, this is my net. This is my net we caught her in, and I will take her to the Caliph, and we will get some money, some good money. I have been poor for so long. I have had to work so hard to support my family. If we sell this mermaid to the Caliph, well, then we're set for a good long time." "Absolutely not," said the first. No. We put her back in the sea." And then the second one finally had enough, and he pulled a knife from his belt. It was a knife with 3 white stones in the handle. And he said, "Look, this may be your boat, but it is my net. I am taking her to the Caliph." "No, you're not," said the other. And in this moment, the mermaid, she who had been the vizier, who was now a mermaid, took her foot and she kicked the middle fisherman right there in the shins. "Ow," he said, and the other one slugged him across the jaw, and the knife fell skittering to the deck, right within reach of the mermaid. And she clutched hold of that knife with the 3 stones in its handle, and she slashed herself free from the net, and she stood up naked as she was, and she said, "Gentlemen, I am no sack of potatoes to be haggled over. I am a mermaid, a woman of the depths of the sea. I was born free as the waves themselves, and free I shall remain." And she stuck that knife between her teeth and leapt from the boat into the water. Shoom! She was gone. And all 3 of them went to the edge of the boat, and they looked down. One of them with joy, one of them with exasperation, but all 3 of them with great wonder. And with a flick of her great tail, she went down and down into the depths, and they saw her no more. So she swam through the depths of the sea with that knife between her teeth, happy to be free again, happy to be in the blue, glimmering depths of the ocean. She swam for a long, long way, and at last she saw land rising up from the bottom of the sea. At last she saw the pilings of a dock. Clearly, this was the edge of the sea. Well, she swam to the bottom of that dock, and she took that knife with the 3 white stones in it, and she stashed it there at the base of one of the pilings, for perhaps she would need it later. And then she swam up the beach and came out into the air, and she looked, and there, not far from her, there was a river emptying itself out into the sea, and there were women there washing clothes in the waters of the river. So she swam towards the shore, and as she swam, she sang that beautiful song within her, and her tail fin went away, and she had 2 legs and 2 feet. And she stepped out onto the shore, sparkling as she was with the water of the sea, and walked along the beach toward these women, who were singing as they washed their clothes. And they saw her and marveled at her and greeted her. And they got her some clothes, and they talked to her, and she told them that she had been shipwrecked far out on the sea and had gone swimming for many days across the sea and been washed up on the shore. Well, they believed her story, and they cared for her. And she went to the village nearby to live with them, to live in that village. And time passed, and soon she got a job in an inn as a kitchen maid, dishing out food to people, drinks and food, and talking to the people who came in and came out. She missed the sea, but at the same time, for a while, it was very interesting to see people, how they worked, how they came in, what they talked about, to hear all the news of the town, the stories told, the arguments, the love affairs, the dreams let loose in this inn where people would eat together and drink together and talk to while away the time. And one day a man came in who she recognized, for it was the fisherman, the one who had wanted to release her to the sea. And he was there with some of his buddies, and they ate and drank, and when it was time to go, he went to her and spoke to her and said, "My dear, I have seen you before. You are the woman of the sea. You must come to my house and have dinner with my wife and my children. We must welcome you to this life on land here." And so she agreed to this. And the next night she went and had a meal with the fisherman, his wife, and with their son. Now their son was a charming young man in his early 20s or so, a good-looking young man. He had been learning fishing from his father. And so she went to this house repeatedly, and over time, I must tell you, they in fact fell in love. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and finally they were married on the seashore beside the place where that river rushed out into the ocean. And there was a marvelous ceremony, and the beautiful songs were sung, and afterwards there was a great feast. And everyone sang and danced till late in the night beside the marvelous and crashing sea. And late in the night, when the moon had risen, those who were still awake took boats they had made out of dried leaves and candles, and they walked out through the crashing surf to where the sea was calm. And each of them made a wish, and placing that candle in the boat of dried leaves, set these boats adrift on the waves. And then everyone went ashore and watched as these little boats of dried leaves, carrying their candles, drifted slowly away. So she and the fisherman's son began to live in a little house in that village. And as months became years, well, she gave birth to, in fact, 7 children. 4 boys and 3 girls, and she raised them up, and at night she would sing them songs filled with the rhythms of the sea, with the waves and with the clouds floating high above, and with the wisdom of the fish and the seaweed and the currents of that great ocean. And she would sing these songs to her children as they grew up. Time passed, and one by one her children as well got married and went off to see the world. And some of them lived in this town, some went far away. One became a merchant, another a seamstress, they did so many things. Another became a great calligrapher, one became a poet, one even became a storyteller. Yes, a woman took on that disreputable profession of telling strange stories. So her children grew up and went out into the world. And finally the day came when her youngest daughter was married. And there was a celebration, yes, on the shore once again. The magical words were said, binding their lives together. And there was a great feast, and many songs were sung, and it was a great happy occasion. And that night everyone went to sleep as darkness covered the world, content and happy with the beautiful celebration that they had been a part of. Now the next morning she woke up earlier than her husband, the fisherman. Years had passed. They were both much older. They both had gray hair by this time. She woke up before him, and she stepped out into the morning light outside of their house. And she said to herself, "Today I will go for a swim. Today I will swim like I have not swum in a long, long time." And she walked through the streets of the village, the quiet streets with the early morning sunshine shining down, seagulls crying out in the air. And she walked down to the beach, and she took off her clothes, she took off her dress and let it fall to the beach, and she dove into those salt blue waters, and she swam, and as she swam, she remembered the song in her heart. And her legs and her feet became a great fin, a great tail, and with a flashing and a thrashing of that tail, she went deeper and deeper into that sea. and her hands moved this way and that, as if prying open the great depths of the ocean. And she saw marvelous things once again, and she swam far, far out. It seemed there were no limits to her strength, and the world had no limits. Far and far she went. There was no boundary at all. The depths went on, and they were filled with beautiful, glorious things. And then she thought to herself, how far have I gone? It's been so long since I've swum in this way. Perhaps I'm far, far from land. And she swam up towards the edge of the sea, towards the surface, that sparkling, silvery ceiling above her, undulating with the waves going this way and that, curling and crashing, and she swam up and up and up, and she came out into the air. And there was the wizard, and there was the cook, and there was the caliph, all looking at him, and all the servants looking at him as well. And the cook said, when will the magic start? And the wizard said, the magic has begun, and the magic has ended. And the vizier stood up, dripping with water, and looked far off into the distance and said, I have seen paradise. And he stepped from the cauldron, splashing water onto the tiles of the throne room. And he turned and looked at everyone, but at the same time he was looking far, far away. And he remembered his 7 children, and what it had been to hold them in his arms, and the tears began to slide down his cheeks. If you have seen paradise, said the caliph, why is it that you weep? Because, said the vizier, it was so beautiful. Well, everyone was amazed by this, and the caliph said, I wish to see these marvels too. I wish to experience this endless universe you speak about. Very well, said the wizard. You must simply step into the cauldron, as the vizier has. Step into the cauldron and submerge yourself, and then you will see. So the caliph, dressed in his royal robes, stepped over the edge of the cauldron and stood there, the water up just above his knees. And there was this strange mix of imperious royalty about him, and also childishness and curiosity and innocence. And slowly he crouched down, and slowly his golden, beautiful robes were under the water, and his back as well, and he tucked his head under, and then he came out again into the air, and a salt water wave splashed him in the face, psh, and then another, psh, and he looked up, and the sky was blue, and there were clouds far up, and he looked far out around him, and he could see no land anywhere. Fear began to grip his heart, panic. He was a man, he was not a mermaid, he was a human man, and there was no land anywhere. Another wave hit him, jostling him this way. What am I to do? He thought to himself. What am I to do? He was amazed, but also terrified. On your back, he said to himself, on your back. He began to lie on his back, conserving his strength. It is said, he said to himself, you can survive for a long time at sea in this way. Get a grip, get a grip. The clouds high above. Is this real? Is this a dream? The waves came, psh, and then another one, psh. He looked up, the beating of his heart loud in his ears. He looked up, and far above him he could see birds. Birds all flying in a certain direction. Aha, he thought. And he began to swim, the backstroke. He began to swim in the same direction as the birds. And still the waves jostled him. Still they pushed him this way and that. But every now and then he would see another bird, all of them flying towards the land. And he swam and he swam. He was getting very tired. But before long he couldn't stand it anymore. And he turned around and looked, and there indeed was land, not that far off. So with joy in his heart he swam closer and closer to the shore. And at last, exhausted, he staggered out, crawling onto the beach. And he heaved himself over and lay down in the sand. And a moment later he heard the voices of children and their footsteps, pitter-pattering along the wet sand. They came, and he opened his eyes, and there was a ring of children all around him, a circle of children looking down. "Mister, who are you?" "I am a shipwrecked sailor," he said. "My boat was lost far out at sea. It is lucky I have survived. Praises to Allah that I have survived." "Yes," they said, "it is amazing. Praises to Allah that you have survived. But you need a little help," one of them said, one of the older ones. "Here, I will go get my father." So he did so, and his father came, and the two of them met, and the man was all tired and worn out, the Caliph was, shipwrecked sailor that he was. And this man took him away to the village to his house, and he cared for him, gave him some dry clothes, gave him some food. He met his wife, and he had a good meal there in the house. Now this man was a jeweler, so it turned out. And this shipwrecked man, this Caliph, washed up on the shore of a new reality, looked around and said to himself, well, I need a job. I need a way forward in this world, in this life. So it turned out the jeweler needed a little help. He needed a salesman. So the Caliph took a job as a salesman for the jeweler. And every day he would accompany him to the market, and he would make dealings with people here and there, merchants who came from far off, from Damascus and Cairo, and he would haggle this way and that, and he would sell jewels to these merchants who were passing through the village. So time went on, weeks became months, and he worked for this jeweler for quite a while. But then one day, several police strode into the marketplace, and they had with them a man with a long white beard. And the man in the beard said, there he is, that's the man. And they all walked towards him. And the police said, you, sir, have been dealing falsely, for you sold this man a jewel which was fake. What? He said. What? A fake jewel? Yes, you did. It's right here. And he pulled it out, and it was a green jewel. And the man with the white beard plopped it down on a table, and he said, this is a fake jewel. And the jeweler himself, who the Caliph worked for, looked it over. He put a little eyepiece in his eye there, and he looked at it, and he said, it's true. This is a fake jewel. What? What? Said the Caliph. It is a fake jewel? Yes, I'm sorry. Somehow it got in here. Somehow it happened. We're taking you away, said the policeman. We're taking you away. And they dragged him away. It wasn't my fault, said the Caliph. I didn't know. You should have known. It's your job to know. And so we are going to punish you. And they took him to the throne room. And there was the Caliph of this town, actually. And there was this man who in his former, was a Caliph. But now he's just a humble salesman for a jeweler. He's there. And the Caliph said, the punishment for dealing falsely is drowning, and so you shall be drowned, for we pride ourselves on the excellence of our jewels in this town. And if we are known far and wide for selling fake, false jewels, well, it would be the end of us. Take him away. What? No, please, he said. Take him away. And these guards grabbed hold of him, and roughly they took him from the throne room. They took him roughly down the streets of the village, and they took him to the shore. And there was a long dock there, and they took him to the end of that dock, and they tied 2 ropes to his feet, and attached to these ropes were some very heavy stones. And the guards looked at him, and they said, prepare to die. We are putting you in the sea for dealing falsely in fake jewels. Have you anything to say? And this man, about to die, began to weep, and he said, I praise the sea. I praise the changing, beautiful sea. Little good, that'll do you, they said, and they took the 2 stones and they heaved them off the end of the dock. Spoosh! And they went down, and the ropes began to trail after really fast, and suddenly he was yanked off his feet and dragged off the end of the dock and down into the water. Down and down he went. Bam! The 2 stones hit the sand at the bottom, and clouds of sand went up, and a moment later he followed. Bam! He hit the sand there. Frantically he looked around, clouds of sand everywhere. There were the pilings of the dock. He looked down. There was a bright glimmer in the sand. What's this? Not a shell. He looked. There was a knife with 3 white stones in its handle. How amazing! He reached down, he took hold of that knife, and he slashed himself free. He cut those ropes free, and he began to swim up, his lungs tight like they were stone, almost bursting. Faster and faster he swam, the silvery edge, the ceiling of the ocean right there, and he burst out gasping. And there was the cook, and there was the wizard, and there was the vizier. And the wizard said, so then, what have you seen? And the Caliph, dripping with water, said, I have seen hell. And he stepped out of the cauldron, water showering down onto the floor of his throne room. And then he looked up at the ceiling of his throne room. He looked up through the ceiling of his throne room at some higher power beyond, and he said, by Allah, this world is crammed with marvels. We are, each of us, so lucky to be here. Well, the next day there was a wedding held in one of the gardens of the royal palace. And the cook and the princess, the daughter of the Caliph, they were married. And the beautiful words were said, binding the 2 of them together, making a great tapestry of their lives, a tapestry they could not even see the edges of as they spoke these words. And there was beautiful music, and a bard sang a song, and there was, of course, feasting. For a feast is the jewel of this life. And at the end of the night, everyone sang the song of the red horse, and then the song of the white horse, and finally the song of the black horse, which cannot be seen. And then everyone went off to sleep. And the next morning the wizard was nowhere to be seen. He was nowhere in the palace. In fact, if you had scoured Baghdad, you would not have found him. But only perhaps if you had been a beggar at the eastern gate of the city, a beggar sitting there in the sand and the dirt, with your empty bowl. Only if you had been this ragged man would you have seen a man walk by, a man with a green earring in his ear. And this man would turn to you and take the green earring out of his ear, shining and sparkling as it was, and he would place it in your bowl. And then, if you had the presence of mind to do so, you would nod and thank him for his gift. And then you would see the wizard walk away into the desert until you could not see him any more. And as for the cook and the princess, they lived together for many years and were very happy in that city of Baghdad. And if they have not died, well then, they are still alive. And if the caliph was any different from his experiences, well, it's hard to say. But as for the vizier, every morning he would get up and look at himself in the mirror in his room. For if you're the vizier of a caliph, well, you must look good if you're in that throne room. You must look smooth and spiffy and just superb like a jewel yourself. So he would look into this mirror, and sometimes as he looked at his beard, at his hair, as he looked deep into his eyes, he would remember what it was like to have curves in his body that had never been there before, what it was like to hold each of his 7 children in his arms and to sing them songs late into the night until they fell asleep, and what it was like to swim joyfully through the limitless depths of the sea. Well, there you have it. What a wild and beautiful story. Thank you for listening to this story. As always, I invite you to find your own way in, to let the story find you. Perhaps there's an image in this story which jumps out at you, which grabs hold of you. The floating brass bed, the cauldron of water, the mermaid swimming in the sea. I invite you to listen to those moments. Pause this recording if you need to. Think about it, dream about it, imagine it for a moment. Let the story find you. It's a more certain way into the depths of this story than anything I could say. I'm speaking for myself in this moment and trying to speak to you and open up this story. But again, your own reactions are a more certain path in than anything I could say. But be that as it may, than anything I could say. I was drawn to this story first by the cauldron of water experience. These folks who just submerge themselves and experience complete other lives. And I recognize this. I recognized it in about 20 different ways. I recognized it as something I had heard before in film, in TV, and in story. Whether it's The Twilight Zone, whether it's Star Trek, The Next Generation, The Inner Light, let's say. Shout out to that episode from the ancient Paleolithic past. This motif, this pattern is part of our experience of this world, and it shows up in many different forms. You can also find it in the writings of Chuang Tzu, the Taoist writer, who wrote about how he dreamed that he was a butterfly flying from flower to flower, and then he awoke. And once awaking, he is now no longer certain if he is Chuang Tzu, dreaming that he was a butterfly, or if he is in fact a butterfly, dreaming now that he is Chuang Tzu. Fled is that music, do I wake or sleep? That's what John Keats wrote at the end of the Ode to a Nightingale, where a song takes him into another reality and returns him to his former self, but he has changed. The world has changed. And that's a magical thing. Mr. Tambourine Man, Bob Dylan, another example. A spell, a song which expresses a desire to be put under a spell and which is itself the spell, putting us in a trance, taking us somewhere else. Marvelous. This wish to be somewhere else, to travel outside ourselves, expressed so completely that it itself becomes a spell, becomes another world. So I say I recognize this story. Not only do I recognize it in sort of pop culture or literature or whatever you want to call it, other stories I've heard in one way or another, I recognize it as a lived experience. Just any of us who has consciousness, which is all of us, and may include the trees and the rocks for all we know, whoever you are, just to be aware and to move through this life and to feel the past, the present, and the future. And the past is memory, the future is imagination, and to feel yourself in this beautiful, sparkling raindrop moment dangling from a leaf, which will never be repeated and holds both the past and the future in it, though those realms do not really exist and are gone. This fabulous present moment we inhabit is just a marvelous thing. I recognize this story in my own life also in the urge to escape from situations I didn't like, to reframe them, to sit there in school and imagine something entirely other. A story, a film I'd just seen, probably Star Wars when I was 12 or whatever, Star Trek or whatever, or Lord of the Rings, all noble and beautiful creations. Don't let me disparage any of them. So I had the desire to escape, and so I would go into imagination. And of course, there is meditation as well. If you've had any meditation experience, just to sit there and to focus on your breath, or perhaps a mantra, and to focus on those things, and to be swept away into a thought, and then to come back, and to be swept away again, as a soldier might be swept away by a river, perhaps, around a building in Baghdad, and then to return to your breath and to this moment, and to finish with that experience of meditating, and to feel the moment around you, and to feel that it is different than it was before. It's a wild ride. And finally, I would say, practicing this story. Yeah, here I am, a storyteller. I found this story in a book, and I practiced it. And I'm walking down my street, but I'm also dunking my head into that cauldron and thinking about the mermaid cradling her 7 children in her arms. And I'm, to be completely honest, lying on my floor after doing a little yoga, kind of drifting off, almost in a half sleep, almost in a hypnotic state, in a trance state. And I'm trying to relax because I'm doing a little yoga, and I'm also like remembering this story. And there I am in the marketplace, and there I am being dragged down the pier and seeing the stones horribly vanish into the water, knowing I will follow. And there I am, floating in this bed through the streets of Baghdad, carried by this spell. Yeah, to be here, but to be somewhere else. What is that about? What does it mean? And what does this story have to tell us? It's kind of 2 halves, I suppose. There's this wizard who wants to bring the cook and the princess together, and that's a problem which needs to be solved. But it almost seems like that's all just a pretense to get us to this cauldron of water, so the wizard can really show his stuff. So that's a question I have. Are these two halves really connected or not? If we are to imagine that they are connected, well, then what might they be saying? That love is also another world we voyage to as the princess voyages in her bed? We have these modes of transport, right? We have the floating brass bed, and we have the cauldron of water. Two methods of going from one place to the other. The first, absolutely physically, but the second one kind of absolutely physically as well, so it seems it's so real, unless it was all a dream. So if these two halves of the story are meant to go together, what do they have to say? Well, I don't know. If you have an answer, I'd love to hear what it is. But we can guess, perhaps something about love as an altered state, perhaps about the possibilities available to us in the world. That's what the wizard seems to want to show to the caliph and to the vizier. That's what he wishes to instruct them in, is the structure of this reality we live in, that in fact it is endless, in fact limitless. And as a mermaid, the vizier has that experience for a little while. And perhaps the caliph does too, although in a negative way. Heaven and hell are both here. Joy and pain mingled together in this world in which we live. And it's all limitless, and it all comes to us in this miraculous way. There is a trail I could follow, and I hope to follow it, following this story further, deeper. Some say it has other related stories. There's one in which, Muhammad was said to have voyaged through the universe all in one night and seen many different marvels, and to have returned. And there's a story that a certain man questioned this, and a Sufi sheikh, a Sufi religious leader, holy man, then had this man thrust his head into a bowl of water, and as he did so, he experienced an entire other life. And then he took his head out, and he was back. So some say that is possibly the source of this story, or just a related branch on the same tree. Others say that its original source is India, and with a Brahmin or a yogi in the mountains, showing someone the illusion which is this life, Maya, as it is referred to in yogic thinking, Maya, the illusion of this life, but also showing them the limitless nature of the reality we inhabit. And who knows? I mean, I might add some other things, maybe something about reincarnation and the many lives we've lived. Who knows? Like I say, this is a trail I would like to follow, but I've just seen a few scattered glimpses. If you want to know the footnote, what book is it? Oh, The Arabian Nights, A Companion, by Robert Irwin, I think it is. That's where I first heard of this story, and then I sought it out. It's located in Richard Burton's wild and strange translation of the Arabian Nights, the 1001 Nights. It's in his book of supplemental nights, kind of above and beyond, if you want to go looking, and I encourage you to go looking. So that's where I found this story, and that's how this story found me. All right, it's a day later, and I've had a little time to ponder this story some more. And I'm reminded of how it is so easy to disregard a story, how it is so easy to not take it seriously, and to be like, oh, that's just fluff. It's fun, but it's just fluff. And how I underestimate stories so often. And I don't want to do that with this story. Because, as I said, it's the cauldron of water which grabbed me at first. And I was like, wow, I got to tell this story. It's amazing. And the whole episode at the beginning, the first half, where the wizard brings together the cook and the princess, that seemed sort of just pretext, just sort of, not that important, but a way to get us to the center of the story, which is the cauldron. But thinking about it some more, I think that's false. I think these two halves of the story are necessary and crucial to each other, and they speak to one another. Because the cauldron, I mean, that's beautiful magic, but there's something theoretical about it. What I mean is this. The wizard does two essential things in this story. He uses the cauldron to show the wonders of the universe and the possibilities of the universe to the caliph and to his vizier. And the other thing he does is bring together this humble cook and the princess. He brings together someone from the lower classes, basically, with someone of the upper classes. So the cauldron, for all its beauty and magic and these wonderful, dazzling thrill rides that the vizier, the caliph, and we as listeners get to go on, that's all somehow, it doesn't seem as, I don't know, it's great, but it's a little theoretical, whereas he's actually doing something in the world. I mean, he changes the lives of the vizier and the caliph, probably, no doubt, by blowing their minds. But to actually take a humble boy, a lower class boy, and to jump class like this, that's a real act in the world, and his magic does. And so it's crucial to this story, I think, that it's not just a display of magical power. It's not just this sort of mind-blowing trip of like, whoa, the universe is wild, but he does something practical to show that there are more possibilities than we think. And one of them is to become a mermaid, sure, but another one is more simple, but perhaps more gigantic a task, is to join these two worlds. And it's a beautiful thing. And I think of this in a divided world, as we are, as you know, a world with war and death in it. And I think of this in America right now, with the red states and the blue states. And I imagine a bed floating through the air, perhaps from a rural community like Enfield, New York, near where I live, or perhaps somewhere in Texas or rural Georgia. And this bed takes a young man, a young boy, a barely more than a teenager, from the the RV park where he lives, and his bed floats over the ATV he drives all the time. It floats over the sign which says "Make America Great Again." It floats over the flag there. The flag perhaps draped over an old crate or something like that, or a flag flying on a pole. This bed floats away from this world, from that state, and goes through the air across the country. And where does it go? Well, we can imagine. Perhaps it goes to somewhere in Cambridge, that part of Boston, where it goes and it floats in, perhaps into a garage where a father was recently grilling some hamburger and some, vegan, bean burgers or something like that. And it lands there. And this boy from rural Georgia, let us imagine, meets in the night with a girl who is also about his age and who is studying, let's say, at Harvard, and studying something like gender studies or archaeology or semantics or linguistics. And somehow the two of them come together in love, and they find things that they have in common, and they find a common joy between them. What a wild dream, huh? And of course, we could imagine it the other way. We could imagine the bed going from Berkeley, California, to somewhere outside of Fresno, and to some rural community there. Not to judge either of these communities, real and beautiful as they are, real and beautiful as we are. That's the kind of magic this wizard does, to join those two worlds. And if it seems unthinkable, impossible to us, well, that's something to ponder and to consider. And it's different from becoming a mermaid or seeing a dragon. But it is magic nonetheless. And perhaps that magic is within our power to join those worlds. Perhaps we, like the wizard, can have a green earring of a certain kind if we want. Perhaps we too can join these worlds so that there may be commonality and a shared experience between them. So I see that now as the magic of this story. And also I consider how the caliph and the vizier have two different experiences. And the vizier, who sort of goes first, has a magical experience of paradise, basically, as he says. And the caliph has a negative experience of being falsely accused and put to death. So it's a world of infinite possibility, yes, but that doesn't mean you get what you want. It doesn't mean that you're in charge. It doesn't mean that it's always a beautiful dream, for there are many possibilities. And perhaps our fear is important. And perhaps the caliph had some fear which kept him from going into that cauldron, striding into it first. He was afraid, perhaps, and perhaps that changed his experience. And if we can let go of our fear, then we can have a different world, a world transformed by our own attitude and by the attitude of those around us. And perhaps we can have magic of a kind. Thank you for listening to this story. If you value this experience of hearing these stories, I invite you to support this podcast through Patreon. And I thank all those who have already done so. It really makes this happen. I love telling stories. I often tell stories in schools. Because of the Patreon support, I don't have to do that 5 days a week, Much as I enjoy that, I have time for other projects like this, finding stories such as this one, which was just sleeping in a book somewhere. And it's such an honor to give it voice and to bring it into the world and to live in it for a while. So you can support this podcast via patreon.com/storyjl. May this story live in you. May you perhaps live in it if you so desire. May it nourish you as it has nourished me. Thank you for listening, and take care.